In the eyes of the law, not every I do is actually forever. In fact, some of them were never really an I do to begin with. Today, we're going to dive deep into the Philippine Family Code to figure out how a marriage can be declared invalid from the absolute start or annulled down the road. It's a really fascinating look at the legal lines that define what a union actually is.
And that's the big question, right? Can every I do be legally undone? We tend to think of marriage as this permanent emotional bond. But the law? The law sees it as a contract. And just like any contract, it can have some serious loopholes. As we're about to see, the whole game is figuring out if that contract was invalid the second it was signed, or if there was a hidden flaw that lets you tear it up later.
So, here's our game plan. We'll start with the basics. What does it mean when a marriage legally isn't a marriage? Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of unions that are void from the very start versus those that are just flawed. We've also got a wild story about a missing spouse, and then we'll wrap up by figuring out what happens to all the stuff, the property, the kids, when it's all over.
All right, first things first. We have to get this one concept straight. In the eyes of the law, not all marriages are created equal. There's a huge fundamental difference between a marriage that is void and one that is voidable.
Okay, this is probably the single most important distinction to get. Think of a void marriage like trying to build a house with an illegal contract. It was never, ever valid. It's a legal fiction. But a voidable marriage, that's like building a house with a contract that has a serious hidden crack in the foundation. The house is standing, it looks real, it feels real, but you have the right to go to court and get it legally condemned. So one was never real, the other is real until a judge says it's not.
So let's kick things off with those marriages that the law says never even happened. The legal term is void ab initio, and that's just a fancy way of saying it was void from the very beginning. Article 35 of the Family Code lays out some absolute deal breakers. We're talking about fundamental, non-negotiable flaws, like if one person is under 18, or if someone's already married, that's bigamy. It even covers things like the person who married you had no legal power to do so. But the most interesting one has to be mistake in identity. And the law means this literally. We're not talking about marrying someone you thought was rich who turned out to be broke. We're talking about you literally marrying the wrong physical person, like a case of mistaken twins at the altar. It's that serious. And then you have Article 36. This is probably one of the most talked about and often misunderstood grounds for nullity, psychological incapacity. Now, this is not just about being incompatible or having a difficult personality. The law is talking about a genuine, pre-existing psychological condition so severe that it makes a person truly incapable of understanding and fulfilling the basic duties of marriage. Mutual love, respect, support, the whole deal. The law also draws some really hard lines when it comes to family relationships. Some are obvious, right? Marriages between parents and kids or brothers and sisters, those are considered incestuous and are absolutely void. But then there's this other category called public policy. And this is where the law steps in to prevent unions that are just considered too close for comfort, like between step-parents and stepchildren or between certain in-laws.
And this right here, this quote from Article 39, tells you everything you need to know about a void marriage. Shall not prescribe is legalese for there is no time limit, no statute of limitations. A marriage that was void on day one is still just as void 50 years later. Time doesn't heal this wound. The flaw is permanent.
So, if all those marriages were never really real, what about the ones that are valid, but they're built on a really shaky foundation? Well, that brings us to voidable marriages. These are real, legal unions until a court officially says they aren't. Under Article 45, a marriage can be annulled for one of 6 key reasons. And the catch is, the problem had to exist at the time of the wedding. You can kind of group them together. You've got issues with consent, like being between 18 and 20 without your parents' blessing, or being forced into it. You have health issues, like being of unsound mind, or having an incurable STD. And then there's fraud, which, as we'll see, has a very, very specific legal meaning.
Now, when the law talks about fraud in marriage, it's not what you probably think. Your spouse lying about how much money they have or what their job is. That doesn't count. Nope. Legally, fraud means hiding very specific, very serious things, like a criminal conviction for a major crime, or the wife being pregnant by another man at the time of the wedding, or hiding a serious addiction or an STD. The lie has to be one of these big ones.
And this is huge. This is the biggest difference between a void marriage and an annulment. There's a clock ticking. Article 47 says you generally have about 5 years from the moment you find out about the fraud or from the moment any force or intimidation stops. If you wait too long, That's it. You might lose your chance to have the marriage annulled forever.
Okay, now for something that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. The law has this incredibly specific scenario it addresses. What on earth happens when a spouse literally vanishes, is presumed dead, and then shows up again?
So Article 41 lays out this wild situation. Let's say your spouse has been gone for 4 years straight, and you have a solid reason to believe they've passed away. You can actually go to court and get them declared presumptively dead. This legally frees you up to remarry. And that 4-year waiting period, it drops to just 2 years if they disappeared under dangerous circumstances, like in a war or a shipwreck. But then, surprise, they walk through the door. So what gives? Which marriage is real? Well, Article 42 gives a crystal clear, if pretty brutal answer. The instant an official document of reappearance is recorded, that second marriage is automatically terminated. Poof, gone. No new court case, no fuss, it just ends. And the first marriage is essentially back in effect. Wild, right?
All right, so a marriage ends one of these ways. It's declared void, it's annulled, or it just vaporizes because a missing spouse came back. What about all the stuff? The house, the kids, the life you actually built together. The law has very specific rules for this messy part.
It all boils down to this one crucial idea: good faith. Basically, did you honestly believe your marriage was totally valid when you entered it? If at least one of you acted in good faith, the law is pretty kind. It protects the children by saying they're still legitimate and you get to split the property fairly. But if both of you were in bad faith, say you both knew one of you was already married but went through it anyway, the consequences are harsh. The kids are considered illegitimate, and any gifts you gave each other because of the marriage are taken back by law.
But here's something the law is super clear on, and it's a good thing. Under Article 54, the kids are protected. No matter what the parents' issues were, any child conceived or born before that final court judgment comes down is considered legitimate. It's basically a legal shield to protect the most innocent people involved.
And get this, you can't just agree to disagree and end your marriage quietly. Article 48 says a public prosecutor has to be involved in every single one of these cases. Their job is to represent the state, which has an interest in preserving marriage, and to make sure the couple isn't just making up a story or faking evidence to get a quick exit.
Finally, and this is so important, getting that court decision is not the finish line. Not even close. According to Articles 52 and 53, there is a strict checklist. You have to get the final judgment officially recorded. All the property has to be divided up, and the portion of the assets guaranteed for the children, their presumptive legitimes, has to be delivered and secured. Only after every single one of those boxes is ticked can either person legally get married again. If you skip a step, that next marriage, it's void too. So we've seen how the law gives all these detailed blueprints for an exit. It treats marriage like a contract with clauses, conditions, and consequences. But it kind of leaves you with a bigger question, doesn't it? While the law can so meticulously define how a marriage ends, can it ever really define what makes a good one begin?